oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown.
When I was serving in Afghanistan, I witnessed some strange stuff. First of all, I did not see any creature but encountered some weird stuff. One of the roles I served was essentially a hearts and minds role, in that we made an effort to get to know the locals and get them to look at us in a better light. Just simple things like giving out food, building things, bringing the kids footballs, etc. One family we constantly met were a family of goat farmers. Over the weeks we got pretty friendly and would share stories through our translator. One day I was talking to him about his goats and how hard life is out here. He said it was fine, but the only thing that bothered him was Bamut. I thought initially it was the local Taliban strongman or something, but he said no, it was an animal. Now, this next bit is said through a translator, so bear that in mind. He said, it's the running wolf. Myself and the translator didn't really know what he meant, but he just said again, a wolf that runs like a man. He then asked us to follow him. Initially I refused, but eventually relented, as I felt he would not lead us to danger, and it may offend him more not to. He led us to a cave about 30 minutes away. In this cave we found what looked like crude drawings on the wall. Nothing you could make out well, but definitely something had drawn by scraping rock. But more disturbing was several gouged lines in the rocks, about 1/3 of an inch deep and about 1 foot long. We had a joke about it, but I tried cutting a similar mark into the wall with my knife, but couldn't do it. Bear in mind, I've been powerlifting since 16, so I'm pretty strong, but couldn't come close. The biggest red flag, however, was the remains of what I think was a goat carcass. Now, this cave was about 300 yards up, about a 60% incline. I don't know how a fox, which is the only predator I saw out there, could kill a goat and drag it from the closest farm, 1.5 kilometers away, up that slope into the mountains. It freaked me out, to be honest. For the remaining 3 months of that tour, I heard noises a few times a week, sounding like a woman wailing. Might be something, or might just be a grown man being scared by a shepherd's story. I'm not weighing in on if they are real or not, but I did find this compelling. I know this is not strictly dogman, so maybe this is the wrong place for it, but maybe someone might find it interesting.
I used to play in an old phone booth at my aunt and uncle's house. This is definitely where the encounters started, although I can't say how, as I have no memory of what I did while inside the phone booth. It was an old wooden thing, like you find at the back of a bar or something. I later found out it was from an old Chicago train station that got torn down. So the first encounter I recall was in 1985 or 86. I was around 7 or 8. It was the summertime, late in the day, so I'd say around dusk. Not full daylight, but not dark out yet. I was in the front yard playing catch with my cousin, and the ball went past me and down the side of the house into the back. The yard was surrounded by a chain-link fence that separated the yard from an overgrown alley that was used as a road one time. When I went to retrieve the ball, I noticed something rustling in the brush. I'm thinking it was a cat or a squirrel or something. As I got closer, I noticed something moving very close to the fence. I thought it was a man at first. It was as big as a man, but covered in brownish hair. From what I could see, its head was canine, snout, ears, etc., but it had human-like hands. I couldn't really see the lower half of the body due to the weeds and grass. It appeared to be injured in some way, the way it was moving. It was using the fence to drag its way down the alley, hand over hand. just pulling itself. I stood and watched for what seemed like a long time, but in reality was probably only a minute or two before running up to get my cousin. I told him I'd seen a monster in the alley. We excitedly talked about it before getting enough courage to head back and look. By the time we got there, it was gone, leaving no trace other than the smashed down grass. I didn't think about it again for a long time. Flash forward to sophomore year of high school, so 1994. I'm 16. I get home and head to my bedroom for a nap. I was meeting some friends back at the school later to see a football game or something like that. So I wake up and it's dark in my room. The only light is coming from the hallway because my door is open several inches. As my eyes adjust, I realize I'm not alone. There are about 4 or 5 creatures in my room watching me. They are all 6 foot or taller, covered in dark hair, with canine facial features, just watching. They don't move toward me, they don't communicate, nothing. I think to myself, I must be dreaming. I lay there for a bit, squeezing my eyes closed, and when I reopen them, the creatures are gone. I convince myself it was a dream and go about my night. The next time it happens is about 2005, so I'm 27. Sometimes after work, some friends would meet me at a local restaurant for drinks and food. I didn't work that night, so my boyfriend and I headed up to meet them. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. On the way home, my boyfriend and I are chatting about the day and what we're going to do that weekend. I notice something ahead in the road, so I slow slightly. I'm thinking it may be a bag or some garbage or something, but as we get closer, I notice it looks more like an animal. At this point, we are both silent, and I'm almost at a complete stop. The creature stands up on its hind legs, and I now see that it's humanoid, with canine features. It slowly turns its head towards us, and then just kind of drifts away. It didn't run. It was just no longer there. It's hard to explain. I made sure I asked my boyfriend to tell me exactly what he saw before I told him what I saw. I wanted to make sure we had seen the same thing. He described to me exactly what I saw. That was the last major encounter I had. Back to the phone booth. I always felt the phone booth was connected somehow, so I asked my mom. I asked her to tell me what I had said after coming out. What was I doing? She said I would just go inside and play around like little kids do. It was safe, and they could keep an eye on me easily. I asked her to try and remember anything that might help me tie it together. After speaking to my aunt, she said they remembered. I would come out and tell them I had gone to visit the puppy people. While helping to tie things together, it only really served to raise more questions. Where did I go when I got in that phone booth?
This happened a couple of years ago. At the time I was 17 and me and 3 of my friends had been up to a cabin in North Carolina in the mountains. We were celebrating the end of junior year of high school. It was just the 4 of us. First night we got there, we heard some noises from outside the cabin at about 1:30 in the morning. I did not want to look outside to see what it was. My friend did and said they couldn't see anything, so I looked out and I couldn't see anything either. Next morning, we went outside and saw some footprints. Footprints like I've never seen before, and I hope to never see again. Fast forward to the night, we decide to go outside and have a campfire. We're 17, 18-year-old kids, joking around, laughing, having fun, enjoying the summer, when we hear a growl from the woods, and the shrubbery and smaller plants around us start moving, like they're in the wind, even though there's no wind. I look behind me and I see 2 amber eyes, staring. I turn to my friend to ask if he's seen it too. He looks at me pale in the face and asks me, what the hell is that thing? I don't know what it is. All I know is it's massive, and I don't want to find out, so we run inside the cabin and tell the other people that were there what we saw. And of course they don't believe us, so they look outside, and it's standing there, about 9.5 feet tall, greyish black fur, very muscular with these massive claws and huge fangs. So they ran inside and shut the door, and we closed the blinds and tried to forget about the thing. Later that night, I went up to bed and looked outside my window, and it was out there, staring directly at me. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that night. The next day, we packed up and left, not wanting to spend another night in those woods. This is the first time I've told anybody about this, because I didn't think anybody would believe me. To this day, the image of that creature staring into my eyes from my bedroom window still haunts me.
This happened when I was about 7 years old to my uncle. He's no longer with us, and I want to share his story. Growing up, I lived in northern Michigan on 5,000 acres of farmland that backed up into state land. Nothing but miles of forest and pasture could be seen. Needless to say, it made us pretty tough, and it takes a lot to spook us. We are all avid hunters, fishermen, and outdoorsmen. Being the only girl, I was raised as a tomboy, and I'm just the same. My uncle went off to join the military, becoming an NCO in a prominent Special Forces division of the US Navy. He was 6'4", built like a wrestler, obviously skilled in survival tactics, and nothing rattled him. He was home on leave, and we went out hunting as it was deer season. I remember him coming into the house, shaking and crying, saying he saw something in the woods. My uncle never cried. He was tough as nails, and would tear someone to shreds before they made him cry. My grandmother tried to get him to make sense, but he kept saying he saw Bigfoot mixed with a wolf. My granny immediately got my grandfather, and he rounded up the rest of the guys, including my dad, a few male cousins, my uncle, who was still terrified, but went because he didn't want to be labeled a chicken. They got all their shotguns and ammunition, and saddled the horses to go clear the woods. Apparently they were aware of the dogman, but I was blissfully young and ignorant. They told me to stay inside, and for no reason was I to step out of the house until they returned. I had never heard my dad or grandfather so serious, so I hid in my room. Sunset comes, and they still aren't back. I'm really worried at this point, because they never stayed in the woods until after dark. Shortly, I heard the sound of the horses running to the barn, and their voices. I was so relieved. They looked troubled when they came into the house, but didn't say anything, probably to not spook me. At dinner, my dad laid down the law. I was no longer allowed to play outside or go to the barns alone. I had to have my grandfather with me at all times. Of course, I was upset by this and felt my independence was being taken away, but I obeyed. The next morning, my dad and my grandfather taught me how to shoot. I knew it was serious. I overheard the adults talking the next night. Apparently, there were tracks where my uncle had a sighting bigger than any wolf could make, but they were definitely dog tracks. As I said before, we are avid outdoorsmen and hunters. We can identify tracks easily, but these couldn't be identified. About 8 foot up in a tree were claw marks. No Michigan bear could make those. We also found claw marks about the same height on multiple trees across our property, had cattle mutilated, and not in the way a coyote or bear would. And it lasted that whole winter. We lost about 30 to 40 cattle that winter, all of them mutilated, all with the same wolf or dog tracks in the snow. I really feel like this experience changed my uncle. Who knows? He did multiple tours in the Middle East for Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom before he committed suicide. After that experience, though, he was never the same. He went from not ever drinking to us never seeing him without a bottle of Jack, and his eyes were always haunted. His personality changed and never went out in the woods again. He quit hunting, and he eventually just quit coming home to visit on leave. He didn't even come for my dad's funeral 2 years later. It was heartbreaking to see him deteriorate the way he did. I truly believe he saw something out there, and it ultimately killed him.
This happened to my friend and his 2 cousins. My friend just decided to share this story with me. I feel it is necessary to tell the story how my friend told it, i.e., from his point of view. Let's jump right in. A few weeks ago, my uncle and my 2 cousins came out to visit my mum and dad for a barbecue. We have one every year on the 1st of May because it happens to be my mum and dad's anniversary. So this is the 1st of May, and my uncle and my 2 cousins get out to my house. We had just moved in back in February, so we were all excited to have our first get-together out there. It was really nice. We were situated on a mountain top with a decently sized yard that was completely surrounded by woods. My dad had plans to clear out a few sections of the woods so that he could put deer feeders out, so he could have the chance of getting some hunting in out there. While he hadn't started preparing to begin cutting trees down, he decided to test the water, as he phrased it, and put about 8 or 9 trail cameras in to see if there were any deer worth hunting this year. I had helped him out in setting up the trail cameras, finding good spots and figuring out what position they should be facing. Then that was the end of that. So while my dad and uncle were hovering over the grill, me and my 2 cousins had decided to relieve our boredom by playing around in the backyard. We had a trampoline set up. The original owners of the house had decided to include their pool in the deal, along with a volleyball court they made on the far side of the pool, bordering the woods. So me and my 2 cousins are enjoying ourselves on the trampoline without a care in the world. After a short while, my dad and uncle came to us and announced that dinner was ready. So we all went inside and grabbed a plate and then back outside to our back deck and sat down and ate. Me and my dad were the first ones to finish eating. My dad looked at me and suggested that we should go out and check on the trail cameras. We had done this many times before, sometimes even checking 3 or 4 times a week, just to see what was out there in the woods. However, this time would be a little different. Me and my dad are going around the property, checking all the trail cameras. We got to the point to where we only hadn't checked one of them, but for some reason, we couldn't manage to find it. After searching around for almost 10 minutes, we eventually found the exact tree it should have been on. I remember placing it on that specific tree, and it was one of those trees that once you saw it again, after the first time, it was damn near impossible not to recognize it. So my dad came up to me and started looking around, questioning that I had put the trail camera on that specific tree. I told him several times that I was 100% positive that this was the tree, that was the tree I placed the trail camera on. So we start circling the tree, looking for any signs of our missing trail camera. While we were shuffling around, trying to find it, I kicked something hard. I tripped over myself and looked down at my feet to see what had tripped me. And there it was. Well, what was left of it, the trail camera. My dad came over to me, and he saw it just as clearly as I did. The trail camera was completely and utterly destroyed. Upon further examination of the trail camera, we learned that the heavy-duty ratchet straps we had used to secure it around this large tree had been torn apart, literally. It looked as though something had grabbed the trail camera and just ripped it completely off the tree, and then just went to town on destroying it. My dad, thinking that whatever did this must have stepped into the range of which the trail camera would have taken a picture of it. He tried to open the trail camera, but to no success. This trail camera, which was almost damn near indestructible, was damaged so badly to the point to where my dad couldn't even get it open. My dad, not wanting to admit defeat, grabbed his knife and exclaimed that he was getting that damn thing open to at least get the memory card. That was all he seemed to care about at that moment. So after a few minutes of forcing his knife into the trail camera, he finally managed to get it open. It took him a second to fully realize where the spot for the memory chip was supposed to be, in the tangled mess inside of the trail camera. When he finally found the spot for the memory card, he pulled it out, and to his utter disbelief, the card had broken into several different pieces while inside of the trail camera. My dad was beyond pissed at that point, because not only did he lose a $150 trail camera, he also lost his only chance of figuring out what did this. Now, even more pissed than before, he said, "Let's go back to the house." He picked up the trail camera and we both headed back to the house. He told the others what had happened to the trail camera and then showed them. Fast forward to that night. My dad, my uncle, me and my 2 cousins all went out into the woods, just practically clinging to hope that one of the other trail cameras had spotted the thing that destroyed one of our cameras, since me and my dad had checked them. My uncle went with my dad, so me and my 2 cousins were together. So we began checking every single trail camera we had left. So my cousins and I are heading towards the location of our 3rd camera, just to retrieve the memory card, because my dad had told all of us to just grab the memory card and he will search all of them together. We get about 15 yards away from our 3rd camera, and in an instant, a chill ran from the top of my head all the way down to both of my feet. I told my 2 cousins about this and they said, "We know, we feel it too." We all started panning, looking to see if we could see anything at all. Then I picked up on something. In the direction we were heading to get the camera, I saw a figure. Me, thinking it was either my dad or my uncle, called out to it by saying hello. Then it looked right at me and my cousins. I knew immediately that it was neither my dad or my uncle, because it had glowing red eyes. At first glance, I thought maybe it was an animal like a deer, thinking that it was just reflecting the lights of our flashlights back to us. But that theory went straight through the window when we turned our flashlights away from it, and then it stood up. I watched in utter horror and disbelief as it stood up very slowly, from about the level a deer would be, to being about 9 feet off the ground. As me and my cousins were standing there in shock, it let out a deep, guttural growl and started advancing towards us. I was the first to snap out of the sort of trance I was in and grabbed both my cousins to try and get them to move so we could run. One of my cousins managed to get out of the trance as well, and we both tried to get the other out of it. My other cousin finally showed a sign that he was out of the trance, and just before I could utter the words to run as fast as we could, this thing leaped into the air and landed on top of the cousin that took the longest to snap out of it. Myself and my other cousin fell to the ground as the creature landed. Then, it let out a loud growl before getting off my cousin and grabbing him by the throat. It lifted him off the ground and roared directly into his face before looking at my other cousin, the one who was just getting back to his feet. The creature threw the first cousin away from it, and then hit the other cousin across the face, causing him to go right back down to the ground. Then, it looked directly at me. It took one gigantic step forward and lifted me off the ground as well. Then it did the same roar it did to my cousin, only much louder. I yelled for my cousins to run if they could. One cousin was helping his brother get back to his feet after being thrown, and they looked at each other, then to the creature, and decided there was only one thing to do. In desperation, they each picked up a fallen tree branch from the ground and charged at the creature. One of my cousins connected a swing to its head while the other went directly for the arm the creature had me in. The force of the blow to the creature's head caused it to falter, while the multiple hits to its arm caused it to drop me. My cousins tried to get a few more swings in, but the creature managed to right itself and caught both incoming blows, going directly for its head. It grabbed both of my cousins, one in each hand, and threw them away from it, causing my cousins to drop the branches they were using as weapons and fall back to the ground. All 3 of us got together and tried to run, but the creature swung one of its arms and connected to all 3 of our chests, causing us to fall down again. The creature reared back its head and let out the most terrifying roar I've ever heard, then started moving towards us. Just then, a gunshot rang out, then another and another. All 3 shots connected to the creature. I looked up just in time to see the creature fall to the ground, appearing to be lifeless. I looked over my shoulder to see my dad and uncle both standing there, as white as sheets. both holding a gun in their hands. They both hurried over to me and my cousins and told us to run back to the house immediately, fearing the creature may not be dead. Both of my cousins booked it back to the house, whereas I did not. I wanted revenge. I wanted it dead, for good. I jerked the gun out of my uncle's hands and proceeded to empty the rest of the clip into this thing's chest. Once I was sure it was dead, I handed my uncle back the gun, which he immediately loaded another mag into. I walked past my dad and started heading back towards the house with my uncle and dad following behind me. We get to the edge of the woods and start making our way across the small field to get to the house. Then, out of nowhere, we heard several more growls and roars, sounding almost exactly like the creature we had just killed. Hearing this, immediately my dad screamed at us to run, so we did. All three of us started to book it to the house as fast as we could. We hopped the about 4-foot-tall chain-link fence that made up the dimensions of our front yard, and then ran up the stairs up onto the porch. My dad and my uncle both turned and started firing their guns, not at anything, almost like they were trying to scare the creatures off. That was, until one of them showed itself. Then both my uncle and my dad shot at it at the same time. It fell to the ground lifeless, and then everything went silent. No more growls or roars were being heard. Nothing at all. Everything just went completely silent. All three of us made it back inside the house. And then, that entire night, everyone in the house that knew how to operate a gun safely had one, in their hands or on their person. It stayed that way until the next morning. Then the next morning came around. Against everything that was screaming in the back of our minds, me, my cousins, and my uncle and my dad went out back into the woods. We were trying to see if we could find bodies of the two creatures we had killed. To our disappointment, we found nothing, except, of course, the blood of the creature I myself had shot. That was all we found, just that one pool of blood. Well, that's it. For those who are curious, my friend still lives at that house. Although he is still scared that anything like that could happen again, he has had no experiences even close to that night since. In fact, he hasn't even seen or heard these creatures since that night. Anyways, that's all for this story. Thank you for listening. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.